The president wants to set up an efficient digital highway under a new normal when he asked Congress to pass a law on paperless government transactions that will also benefit online businesses and protect online consumers. E-commerce has started to grow during the pandemic, but what is the future of micro, small, and medium enterprises, or the MSMEs, under this new normal? We discussed in this episode of the Chiefs. Welcome to this weekend edition of the Chiefs. With us right now are Ana Marie Pamintuan of the Philippine Star, reporting from the Star office in the port area. and next in a while will be Robbie Lampay of One News, reporting naman from Lion City in Mandaluyong, the TV5 News there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ano sa natin for tomorrow morning? What's coming up to the Philippine Star?
Well, mostly kung anong nangyari, yung announcement this morning, of course, there were a lot of stories there. Sabi, of course, as everyone expected, GCQ pa rin ang Metro Manila. At least ang Cebu has it easier now na lumuwag sa kanila. And then we're being told that at least we've hit rock bottom noong pang May, and we are now on our way to our economic recovery. Siguro magandang tanungin yan mamaya sa mga guests natin.
And also, of course, among other things, yung big spike doon sa recoveries kasi nag-change definitions yung DOH midway. Now, under the new definitions, if you are positive but asymptomatic or mild, tapos lumagpas ka ng 14 days since you tested positive, you are considered recovered.
Yes.
Without kahit walang testing.
Yes.
So, ang assumption doon is lumagpas ka ng 14 days, so wala ka pa rin symptoms, asymptomatic naman, therefore wala ka ng virus.
Well, siguro, gusto lang nilang, you want to put a positive, not a spin, but you want people to look at it in a positive way, di ba? Kasi, ang bad news today is, we had a big jump of 4,000 cases.
4,000.
And now we're at 93,000. 93,000 na. So,
yeah. Oh, and there's Robbie Lampay coming online from the Channel 5 newsroom in Mandaluyong. Robbie, ano ang big story?
Ewan ko, tatanungin kayo, are we still talking about yung bagong definitions and bagong methodologies for counting?
Well, hindi, yun nga, nag-jump ngayon. Medyo malaki yung jump, 4,000. And now we've over 93,000 cases na.
Kagaya nga na pinag-usapan natin kahapon with Yusek Vergere, ang sinusubukan din ni-emphasize ng gobyerno, tumataas din naman yung number ng recoveries. So that's something, it really depends on what on how you're looking at it. But one way that government is trying to emphasize to look at it is we are trying to have a better way, a better system for counting. At maraming humahabol because they're reconciling numbers with LGUs as well. Pero yung isang malaking balita kanina sa Ospital ng Maynila, this has nothing to do with methodologies. Tumataas din daw, sabi ng Ospital ng Maynila, yung dead on arrivals na nanonote nila pagdating sa hospital. So they're taking note of that as well. As much as 6 patients a day are arriving already dead.
Yes.
And there's one more angle that's quite a bit underreported. Yung number of backlogs dun sa testing. In the last few days, I'm not sure, it's been more than a week. Wala na kasi yung dati kasi nasa COVID tracker ng DOH yung nag-positive versus yung mga confirmed. So you can tell the difference between, you see the backlog Ngayon wala ding positive numbers just to confirm. But if you check other websites that also use the DOH data, nandun yung positive numbers. And the positive numbers in those websites, nag-guess natin once yung isa sa mga nasa 130 plus thousand already. Yung positive versus 90 plus na confirmed. So it's a backlog of around 37,000.
Wow.
Na hindi pa confirmed.
Sinabi rin yan dati ng ano, di ba? Sinabi rin yan ng dati ng Okta Research. And they were emphasizing that. Parang we don't know how to count it. And this was back when malayo pa tayo sa 80,000 level. I think this was back when we were still talking about it mga 60,000 or so.
Yes. Well, siguro,
Anyway, segue.
siguro pwede na natin, well, I think they have to balance the health aspect with the need to reopen the economy, no? So, hindi dapat natatakot ang mga tao kahit tumataas. Sinasabi rin nila na tumataas yung recovery. So, I think that's their way of balancing all these numbers. But anyway, maybe we will ask our trade chief, Ed, you can introduce him, our guest.
Yes.
Impact nito sa ating mga...
Yeah, we are fortunate to have with us tonight Trade Secretary Ramon Lopez. Sir, Secretary, thank you for joining us po.
Good evening.
Hello, good evening. Good evening.
Hi. Good evening po.
Hi, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Sir, so sa intro, we talked about yung MSMEs and how we hope they can recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. You do have a program for MSMEs. It's called CARES, yung COVID-19 Assistance to Restart Enterprises. It's also called CARES. But as early as June, nagka-prema na po doon sa I think sa pondo. So you had to stop receiving applications. Now tell us about it now. Yung CARES, how is it going? I understand there's more money being put in. How far are we down the line?
Yeah, so it's a 1 billion fund. And to date, over 650 million na yung na-approve. Talagang malapit nang maubos yung pondo na yon dahil ang application ay 3.5 billion pesos. So way above the 1 billion allocation. Yun ang na-allocate dito only because when nagpe-prepare tayo ng stimulus package, we were limited by the budget that the SB Corporation has. So parang ibinigay niya na lahat ng budget niya para meron na kaagad ready program dito. But of course, we are waiting dito sa stimulus package na hopefully ay magkaroon din ng additional fund na allocation para sa SB Corporation. Ngayon, may arrangement din po kami with the DBP Land Bank na kung hindi masama yung SB Corp dito sa stimulus package, ang DBP Land Bank ready na rin magpahiram. In fact, may in-arrange na rin kaming additional funding from them habang iniintay pa itong stimulus package. And of course, as we look into the 2021 budget, meron din kaming ina-expect doon na 1.5 billion na additional funding plus the 1 billion that we just recently approved that will come from the DBP Land Bank. No? So in effect, we will be having around 3.5 billion coming into next year. Of course, it will be a bonus kung masama tayo sa stimulus package being discussed at the Senate. Para ngayon pa lang taon na to ay meron na tayong pondo rin para sa micro SMEs. But this is not to give you this is not the universe of the support to the micro SMEs. As been relayed before, ang Land Bank DBP rin can relent directly to the microfinance institution na nagpapahiram sa micro SMEs. So, sabihin lahat itong pondo na to ay pwedeng ilaan dito sa micro SMEs natin. At dito sa stimulus package, I think ang naka-propose sa ngayon ay 50 billion pesos para dito sa grupo ng mga micro SMEs. On top of that, nabanggit din ng ating Pangulo nung SONA na in-encourage natin ng Central Bank na encourage itong mga bangko para mag-extend ng mga kanilang mga loan terms. Parang pag ni-extend kasi yung loan terms is like lending again to the borrowers dito sa mga kanilang mga kliyente. So yun po yung mga ibang paraan para talagang ma-sustain ma-sustain yung operation ng mga korporasyon at mga micro SMEs.
Sir, if I remember right, mga 90% yung MSMEs dun sa mga negosyo sa Pilipinas, more or less. Pero medyo humaba, tumagal longer than we would have wanted yung GCQ dun sa mga business hubs like Metro Manila. I'm kamusta po ngayon ng MSMEs? We've been hearing about how difficult it's been for them from last month. What about this month? 1 month down the line, 1 month extension pa. How are they now?
That's the reason, Ed, why we keep on adding more sectors na hindi pa dapat allowed under GCQ, allowed sila under modified GCQ, but we were really intending to include them under GCQ. For example, ang mga micro SMEs na nasa barbershops and salons, pati mga restaurants, karamihan micro SMEs talaga yan, inallow sila for dine-in, especially restaurants, for the GCQ. Dati yan, sa unang mga listahan natin, sila ay pang-modified GCQ
And GCQ.
Oo. So, just sa employment dyan, dun lang sa mga barbershop salons, mga 400,000 ang nasa industry na yan. Dito sa restaurants, mga 1.9 million ang workers dito po sa sector na yan. And then recently, in fact, effective today, tomorrow, August 1, we're adding more sectors, yung mga nasa modified GCQ uli yan, na i-advance natin.
Yes, I want to ask you about that, Secretary. Mga internet cafes and gyms. Hindi ba kayo nag-aalala na considering na today nag-jump yung ating COVID cases by 4,000 and now we've hit more than 93,000. I understand there was some debate kung dapat ngang mag-tighten pa tayo in Metro Manila. Instead, we are going to open up gyms and internet cafes. Hindi ba kayo nag-aalala na baka sumama yung sitwasyon health-wise?
Hindi po. Very calculated itong move na to. Yes, magta-tighten tayo in terms of yung pag-comply dito sa mga health protocols. And as we reopen, hindi naman ibig sabihin yan ay magiging pabaya at nag-open tayo ng walang all the protections and the safety protocols. Kaya po itong mga nahuling nag-open precisely because we would like really to add more health protocols dito sa mga industriya na to. For example, when you talk of gyms, doon talaga yan hindi namin naisama talaga sa opening. Kaya nga po nahuli siya dito sa opening na to. Only because dito nandyan yung mga shared equipment, nandyan yung baka magkakalapit itong mga nag-exercise. So precisely dito sa new protocol natin, for this particular sector, may separate siya ng mga protocol na extra precaution, pagsuot ng gloves, kasi hinahawakan mo yung mga shared mga equipment yan, yung paglalayo rin ng mga machines, may physical distancing, yung air circulation sa loob, kung pwede open air na, at kung may air condition naman ay may malakas na exhaust, so yan yung mga requirement para i-allow silang magbukas. Bawal din yung group exercise. May mga special protocol sila. Example yon. But again, as we have been saying, matagal na kasi talagang naka-quarantine ang karamihan sa atin. Kaya po talagang we'll just have to live with the virus. It is here to stay. I-manage natin, i-control natin sila. At again, extra precaution. Isa pa yan. So, when talking of yung pag-manage nga dito, while we are gradually reopening some sectors at may additional protocols sila, on the overall din, meron din ginagawa nga na mas aggressive yung mass testing, yung tracing. Very important para masuko yung pagkalat talaga dito. So at least na-identify natin, the more lumalabas yung mga positive, na-identify sino yung may ng virus at ma-isolate sila at ma-treat sila. At i-trace yung mga nakasalamuhan nila para talagang sila rin ay ma-quarantine, ma-isolate din, and ma-trace and ma-treat. So these are really important moves na are part of the new normal in dealing with the virus. In the meantime, we are allowing our workers na magtrabaho at kumita. Kasi kung naka-quarantine, alam naman natin, nakita rin natin yung impact nung lahat walang ginagawa, na wala ng trabaho at aasa pa sa SAP. Siyempre. So it's a drain also to the government. But at the same time, yung kababayan natin gustong-gusto magtrabaho, hindi naman sasapat yung binibigay na yon, kaya gusto nila talaga maghanap buhay. Kaya talagang gumagawa tayo ng paraan para more sectors can be reopened pero safely and gradually. In fact, 30% lang ang i-allow muna tulad nung nag-umpisa ang restaurant dining. So ito 30%. At pag maganda ang compliance, at saka natin i-increase sa 50%. But that is the way it goes. Parang i-open na natin at kahit dahan-dahan. Para may trabaho, may income.
Yeah, Secretary, kumpletuhin lang natin yung konteksto. I mean, I just want to follow up and follow through on Ami's question. Of course, I mean, the more we hear from government officials, the more we appreciate how complicated and how difficult the dilemmas are balancing the public health on one hand and the socio-economic impacts on the other. But right now, the immediate context is sa mga dumadagdag, ano? Tumataas yung numbers. Every day we're getting reports from hospitals getting overwhelmed, and we're hearing of spikes and clusterings in some BPOs, in some companies, in some areas, and so on. Is there is part of the discussion as well any kind of trigger mechanism that will actually make you reconsider? Because the Metro Manila mayors got their way. Obviously, we're staying at DCQ, hinayaan, but tumaas ang numbers, is there a way that it might be a false start and end the economy a false start?
No. So, dito sinasabi dito na mag-open tayo pero mas maingat nga yung paggagawa na mga actions. For example, I mentioned again yung massive tracing and testing. So yon, very important yon. And also our ability to do localized lockdown, going where the hotspots are. The idea is, siyempre, hindi mo kailangan isara yung lahat ng ekonomiya mo, lahat ng city mo, kung na-identify mo anong barangay yung hotspot or anong village or anong building. So ngayon, ang dinidefine na rin ngayon, how do we do the localized lockdown as granular as possible? For example, yung nag-atake or nagkaroon ng positive test ay galing lamang sa isang building or galing lamang nag-concentrate sa isang floor, pwedeng ang floor na yun ang ila-lockdown o kaya it's the entire building or yung street. So ito po yung mga proseso na hinahandle naman ng DOH at DILG at mga LGUs. Ano yung mga definition nila? Paano magiging kaliit, ka-specific yung mga lockdown? Sa ganun, ma-address pa rin yung mga concern on the health side without closing the entire city or the entire Metro Manila. Ang mga LGUs po, maingat na maingat. Sila nga po yung kapartner natin dito. In fact, kung sila lang din ang masusunod, siguro mas gusto nila eh. Di ba nga, may ibang LGU, gusto nila mas mahigpit pa. Mas nag-ECQ pa si Navotas, naalala ko nung a few weeks ago. So, sila rin gusto talaga nilang mas mahigpit. Subalit, na-realize din nila yung pangangailangan din magtrabaho, maghanap buhay yung mga tao. Kaya talagang you just have to test and also open up carefully. At dito naman sa mga negosyo na to, kaya ganun ka-stricto din yung compliance sa pagsunod ng mga health protocols. Dito po sa barbershops and for example, and the restaurants, everyday minomonitor yan. At yung compliance rate nila napakataas, 92% to 100% in some of the by protocol minomonitor siya. Lahat ba nagsusuot ng mask? Dumadaan ba sila sa yung mga sanitation, etc.? Kinukunan ba ng temperature? Nakalista po yan. Kaya, ibig sabihin, you just have to learn to live with the virus and be strict on that. There is no other way. Talagang, this will be here until next year. Siguro, even with the vaccine, hindi lahat ay magiging immune dito po sa virus na to. So, living the life ng may trabaho, pero doble-doble ingat tayo as we go out. And by the way, ang isa pang, aside from the testing and all that, napag-usapan sa IETF yung adding another layer of protection. Aside from face mask, yung face shield.
Yeah,
kasi nga dito sa mga, sabi ng mga experts, nag-advise sa atin, yung mga taga-UP, hindi pa lang UP, iba-ibang eskwelahan sila, at pag naka-mask ka lang, around 82% yung protection. Pero pagka dinagdagan mo pa ng face shield, 99%.
So itutuloy niyo yan, sir? So most likely it will be approved? Most likely it will be approved yung face shield?
Approved na siya, pero ano pa lang siya ngayon? Being encouraged, hindi pa requirement.
Yes, hindi pa requirement.
Hindi pa mandatory.
Approved na siya as a additional safety measure.
Yes.
Pero hindi pa siya nire-require na mandatory. Ano pa natin yan? Siyempre, bigyan natin time din yung mga tao mag-adjust maybe in 2 weeks or 3 weeks at makabili at maraming do-it-yourself kasi it's basically an an acetate, yung plastic
Yes.
na wrap around or cover in your front part of the face.
Ipa-price control niyo ba yon, sir? Ipa-price control niyo ba yung face shield?
No, ang
Kasi-
gagawin po natin dyan, actually, maraming livelihood na ma-offer po dyan. So, ang gagawin natin, kasi tulad ho ngayon, may project ngayon dahil sabi ng Presidente, magbibigay siya ng 20 million na mask. So, we are actually in the midst of talking to many cooperatives, livelihood, mga pati kababaihan. Sila magpuproduce ng wearable, anong tawag na, washable, wearable na mask. Okay, so 20 million yan. Pati itong face shield, actually, nung hindi pa nire-require naman ito, hindi pa nauso ito, marami na rin gumawa dito sa ating mga cooperative na yung binigyan natin ng SSF, for example, mga shared service facility, na gumawa na rin sila ng mga face shield na yan, iba-ibang design, no? Of course, nauso ngayon yung part of the salamin, may free. So that will be the norm again in the future, hindi lang mask in the future yung face shield.
Sir, but do we understand you correctly that it will become mandatory? That's what I understood from you kasi parang ngayon it's encouraged pa lang, pero in the next few weeks it will be required.
Yes.
So
it will be required. Kasi yan na talagang, 'di ba, we are all in trying to find out paano pa ma-increase yung protection as we are doing our daily lives na mapasok sa, lalo na sa public transport. In the public transport, if I'm not mistaken, required na siya. Kung hindi ako nagkakamali, no, yung mask and face shield pag nasa public transport. Pero the more pag i-require po yan diyan sa mga ganyang public transport, mass assembly na ina-allow na to a certain extent sa simbahan and all that. Pero ito rin ang pinag-aaralan din ngayon kung whether ang mass assembly is something na baka ito ay kung maiiwasan naman ay dapat ding i-control or bawalan muna dahil again para nga maiwasan itong pagkalat.
Sir, speaking of living with the virus, one of the emphasis ng presidente ngayon is internet trading, and he is urging Congress to work on it. Yung sa input ng DTI, sir, anong specific measures are you thinking about to encourage people or to help people shift or to use the internet for their businesses, especially during this pandemic?
Oo, na lumakas talaga yung internet business na yan, pati deliveries nung nag-pandemic. Kaya pinromote during the pandemic, even ECQ, panayo ang webinars ng DTI and with other partners para maturuan yung mga may businesses na wala pa sa online para maging online. Hello? Para maging online sila. So yan, tuloy-tuloy yung seminar, pag-seminar natin dyan for free. Excuse me.
May proposal ba kayo, sir, sa Congress? Any specific measures you are planning to propose to Congress to encourage this sector of the economy?
Well, in-encourage siya in the sense na with all the training natin. Ngayon, ang isang pinag-iisipan namin, hindi ko lang masigurado kung na-input itong proposal namin before na siguro doon sa mga magre-register, baka bigyan sila nung 2-year na income tax holiday. Although, if you think about it, meron namang current law. Pero merong current law on barangay micro-business kasi na may 2-year ka muna, na hindi ka muna, may income tax holiday ka. No? So, in effect, pwede rin i-apply yon. Kasi tayo naman po sa DTI, para dati na nating na-encourage na mag-register, yung mga nasa business talaga, no? Hindi yung mga personal na transaction. Yung nasa business talaga, mag-register, whether online or hindi online, yung brick and mortar. Ever since yun po yung na-encourage natin para lumaki yung business nila.
How do you make the distinction between, kanina po, in-emphasize nyo that we're talking about real businesses, yung talagang hindi yung mga personal transaction, kanyo. How do you make the distinction?
Kung gusto mo talaga i-monitor yung isang nagbebenta online, mapapansin mo kung everyday yan nagbebenta. And of course, hahanapan mo lang, mag-investigate lang. Magtatanong-tanong tayo. I mean, not ako, no? Pero yung ibig sabihin, pwedeng tanungin kung ito ay isang regular negosyo na. At makikita naman yon at doon na malalaman na dapat ito nagrehistro na business. And again, kahit maliit ka, kailangan mag-register. Anyway po, may exemption naman. Exempted sa VAT. Pagka below 3 million ang iyong binibenta for the whole year, wala ka namang babayaran na VAT saves dito. Tapos, of course, pag ang income ay 250,000 and below in a year, exempted ka rin sa income tax din. So, ang importante lang po ay nakaregister sila para nga naman, whether, again, online or hindi online, it will help in consumer protection as well. Registered at may traceability. Mahahanap kung may mga problema dun sa mga binenta mo. At yung consumers din, ito rin ang matagal nang hinihingi. Paano kami maprotektahan pag bumili ako online? Hindi natin alam kung sino yung nagbenta sa'yo sa kapila, sa Facebook or sa Instagram. Buti na lang kung ikaw ay bumili dun sa mga kilalang platform na registered sila dun sa platform, yung nagbebenta at matatrace sila. Pero kung hindi sila dun bumili, para kang sa brick and mortar, para kang bumili sa sidewalk. Hindi mo alam kung sino yung nag-produce, sino nag-manufacture, kung gumagana yung produkto o may depekto. So, ganun din yung principle sa online. Importante you are dealing with legitimate or yung talagang rehistrado ng negosyo. Again, for regular business, kung ikaw ay misa-misa nagbebenta in and out, hindi hobby lang yon, hobby. Hindi po covered naman yon dito sa pinag-uusapan natin.
Sec, it's not about the DTI itself, but you are part of the IATF. I was wondering if I could ask you about something that the president mentioned kanina. Actually, it's not the first time he's mentioned it. So, well, the president said kanina by December, we'll probably be vaccinating or we'll probably have a vaccine already. And that was echoed by Secretary Dominguez, who said na by October, baka yung FDA will already be processing the approval of a vaccine. I'm wondering, sir, as far as the IATF is concerned, are we aware already, or is the IATF already aware that there is a vaccine almost ready? Are we missing out on something? Kasi everybody we talked to said na baka by next year pa yung vaccine.
No, ganito po, bali ito IATF, nasasama sa discussion yung status ng mga iba-ibang nagde-develop ng vaccines. And in our list, of course, it's more than 6, but merong top 6 na baga nag-uunahan na iba-ibang makers at iba from different countries. From Europe or from US or from China. So at meron pang iba. So minomonitor that at parang merong karing napapansin na yung iba mas advanced na, stage 3 na clinical trial, etc. So parang aware ang IATF diyan, kaya yung pinag-usapan po nila Pangulong Duterte at yung suggestion po na binanggit ni Secretary Dominguez ay parang may sistema na tayo na kung sakaling magiging available na yan, ay tayo rin ay ready namang bumili ditong vaccine na to para sa ating mga kababayan, lalo na yung poorest of the poor, ang sabi nila, no? Yung mahihirap din part siguro ito ng ating 4Ps. At ito po, doon na unang ibibigay ng ating Pangulo yung vaccine. At yung sistema naman ng pagbili ay napag-usapan na ho namin ni Secretary Dominguez, in effect na gagamitin or padadaanin under the PITC because it is the government agency naman na ito naman talaga yung trading arm or taga-import ng gobyerno or taga-bili ng gobyerno kung kinakailangan. Yung Philippine International Trading Corp under DTI. So kaya ho yung nag-usapan namin yung paano yung sistema nito at sa kanila under sa DOF naman itong mga bangko ng DBP Land Bank na pwede sila ang maging source ng pondo. Para kumbaga sa budget, hindi muna manggaling sa budget.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Kung ano man yung mabili na to, yung budget in the next 2 years, 3 years, or whatever, 4 years, ito naman yung lalaanan para pambayad dito. So, ganun ang pinaka-basic principle nito.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. I was just asking the question as a way of parang, I suppose, managing expectations. Kasi when we talk about the vaccine for distribution by December, that's already that's already putting the timetables in place. So it just as a matter of I suppose realistic expectations. Maraming salamat po, Secretary Mon. Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Just on that point lang, parang ang sinasabi lang naman po natin, anytime na maging ma-determine na meron ng ready na vaccine, si DOH naman ang magde-decide kung ano yung pumasa na anong brand, anong for what country, at kung ano yung bibilin, anong quantity muna.
Opo.
So talagang siguro tingin natin to magiging face by face din.
Sir, isa na lang. Are you also coordinating with US companies? Kasi sabi ni Bill Gates, he's expecting a vaccine sa US companies by November siguro.
Yes, opo. In fact, yung isang nabanggit doon,
Dalawang companies yun.
from the US,
Yes.
Pfizer and another one.
Yes.
I forgot. So, kaya po napag-usapan yon kasi yun nga parang maganda naman yung indication mula sa mga leaders nila na ang Pilipinas will also be given preference pag magkaroon ng vaccine sa kanila makadevelop.
Okay.
Kaya yun ang pinag-aralan na. Paano tayo makakakuha kaagad nito? Paano mapopondohan ito? Yan.
Okay.
Tanong rin sa akin kanina kung kailangan magbenta ng asset ng Pilipinas para bumili nito. Yun nga po, parang ang sagot na po doon ay hindi naman kailangan dahil may pondo naman ang ating mga GFIs, Government Financial Institutions.
Okay.
Okay. Maraming salamat po, Secretary Mon Lopez ng DTI. Sir, thank you po for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Salamat po sa inyo. Good night.
Thank you, sir. We will just pause for a break. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to the Chiefs. We are now in the final stage of our conversation. And now joining us is Secretary Joey Concepcion, Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship. Good evening, Mr. Concepcion.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yes, I understand you asked for GCQ to be retained in Metro Manila, despite all the bad news in recent days. And we'd like to ask you what's the status of our micro, small, and medium enterprises? Are more businesses shutting down?
Well, your earlier guest, Secretary Mon Lopez,
Yes.
knows basically the impact on the economy right now. from March 15 till what's that, 2.5 months, we locked down the economy basically by locking down our people to prevent the virus from really spreading, which was the right decision at that time. But of course, there are consequences when you try to save many lives. No? You shut down the economy, and the consequences are jobs and livelihoods have been affected. Moving forward, it is very important for us to really save lives. That is imperative. But we have also to try to save the jobs and that people have, and of course the livelihoods that people have started. No? Our advocacy in Go Negotia is 15 years today. No? This is our 15-year anniversary, and we have seen countless of MSMEs who've been so successful through hard work. And you can see the level of frustration that they have today when faced with this surmounting pandemic problem. And there is no other option but for us to open the economy, of course, carefully, and or else the government will not be able to sustain social immigration. You have issues with tax revenues. I mean, national government and local government will have that issue.
Sec Joey, ano po kasi, I think the latest data we have from the DTI about the MSMEs, ano pa yung survey done nung first half ng June that was released later in that month. Lumalabas na 26% ng MSMEs had closed down, 22% are now operating, but 52% are partially operating. But yun nga, that was a month and a half ago pa eh. We're wondering from your end, do we have more current data? Have things improved for MSMEs or have things gotten worse with the extension of GCQ?
Well, by far from ECQ to GCQ, there's been a big change. No? Of course, people are now restarting their businesses. And that's important. And we're entering the strongest months of the year, August onward to December, which is the Christmas season. So the demand for essential and even non-essential during the Christmas period will be high. So people are now building their inventory, basically in food, and some maybe semi-essential. So if the government will call for an ECQ, then everybody will have to stop again, no? And people will be laid off, businesses will be closed. No? So the suggestion about Tuesday last week, we had a meeting with the business sector, the conglomerates, the mayors, the business organizations, and selected members of the IATF were part of that meeting. About 111 people attended that meeting. And what was very good is there was an alignment on where and how do we coexist with the virus. It is very important to understand that while we can be optimistic that a cure will be found this year or next year, we cannot plan on that basis. We plan on a worst case scenario. Many of the MSMEs today are basically hand to mouth. Many of them restructured their loans and refinance and the banks have been kind enough to include their interest. But what is sorely lacking is the working capital. Many have lost money, so they have to increase their equity or borrow more money. And that is a challenge today because many banks are risk averse because they know that we're entering a very challenging scenario. If the health situation is not controlled, your economic problem will not get away, and it can even get up. In the end, we really have to manage our health situation, and that's where the private sector and my role is try to help. No? And the program that Congresswoman Janet Garin presented during that meeting with the public and private sector was very focused. No? How do we coexist with the virus? And of course, you've been hearing me countless of. I've been always advocating test. No? Create visibility. Initially, we started with rapid test kits because that was the only weapon that we had against the enemy, which was the invisible enemy, the virus. It created definitely more visibility, and that's why we're able to manage our workers better. We're able to isolate the sick, those with the positive on IgM, we subject them to PCR. Now we are launching what we call the pooled PCR testing, RT-PCR testing. This is now swab testing. So we're launching that now. And that is a game changer because it will increase the speed, it will increase the capacity, and bring down the cost.
Yeah, Secretary, as we get better at
I can't
testing,
hear.
can you hear me,
Hello?
Secretary? Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hello, hello. I can't hear.
Sir,
Oh,
can you hear any of us, sir?
I
Can
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 hear
you
you.
hear
I
us?
can hear. I can hear you. I can hear both of
So,
you.
si Robby ang nawawala. Si Robby nawawala. Anyway, Secretary Dominguez said we hit rock bottom actually in May, and the economy is now recovering. That's what he's saying. But saying how this crisis is being prolonged, do you agree with this observation that we're actually recovering, or are we headed for the worst still?
No, no. We are definitely recovering because the economy now is opening up. You can see the flow of goods, the supply chain not disrupted. There are no more security checkpoints. So the approach really, as part of the strategy in coexisting with the virus, is we have to move and continue with granularized lockdowns. We avoid locking down the entire Metro Manila or NCR. And that is the approach now that the IATF and we in that meeting we're perfectly aligned. The mayors want it. I think their foot is in the ground. They know where the problem is, and you combine it with massive targeted testing to create visibility, locking down barangays, quarantining sitios, quarantining buildings. This is the approach, and with that, commerce can continue. No, commerce can continue rather than when you lock down a huge area, then commerce will stop. So this is how we should move forward. And whatever test method we do, whether we use rapid, PCR, or pooled PCR, uh, we use all of that to help create visibility so that people can trace where the infection is. No, people can find out where tracing is very important. Isolating is the next step. There, we should. Secretary Garin is pushing for no home quarantine. She believes that everybody should could be quarantined isolation centers. No, and of course treatment. No.
hmm. Secretary, can you hear me now? Robbie Alapay.
Yes, I can hear you now.
I'm just curious, as somebody who mentors a lot of businesses, on the demand side, what do we do? Even as you open up the economy, the reality is people are very afraid to go out. They would still rather just stay at home. Do we let that take care of itself, or do we actively try to build up confidence?
Well, confidence can only be built when they see that there is stability in the health situation. When they see the levels of infection moving up, people get scared, especially now. A lot of people are very scared. Of course, that will affect confidence on going out, eating in restaurants. No? But there are people who are also willing to take that risk. No? Maybe more and more people are who have live in very small homes will want to go out and dine with their family, and so that there is people who will take that risk, but also there's some of the elderly, they will not want to take that risk. No? Of course, consumer confidence is also important. People don't want to spend because they fear that there could be another ECQ, so more people will be laid off or they may be laid off, so they will conserve their spending, no, and reserve it for the later part of the year pagdating ng Christmas while they still have a job. So people are saving at this point in time. So you can't help it. People are aware of the risk of this pandemic, and they are hoping that the infection would stabilize and get lower. No.
Okay. As people find their balance, as people find their own level of comfort and equilibrium, you could sense that their behaviors are changing as well. I'd rather not go to a mall 3 cities away. I'd rather just go to a restaurant, a small restaurant here in my barangay, just outside our village, and so on. How do you see the ecosystems and behaviors changing for the Filipino consumers?
Well, you can see it changing. Everybody's moving already to digitalization. Digital market platforms are really growing leaps and bounds. People are moving towards cashless, and that will accelerate further. The fear is causing people to distance them from basically mingling with others. So food, our own business, for example, we have experienced a huge growth. Why? Because people are going back to eating at home rather than eating out. So it's back to the dining with your family. So the good part of the pandemic is families are becoming closer. They're seeing less friends. So the family is back. People are having meals together. During prior to the pandemic, everybody was eating out. Us parents, our children's hanging out with friends. So now the family is now the center. No? That's the good part of this pandemic. But so social uh, gatherings are much less, and that will affect also businesses. People will not go out in large numbers. So we have to ride through this pandemic. The new normal will make businesses, quite a number of businesses, not viable. The pandemic is creating that. The health situation is creating that. So you cannot expect many businesses to be viable. What they have to do is to try to uh, make it through this crisis, whether it's a year, 2 years, or longer. We really don't know. I know there's a lot of uh, drugs that are being developed, vaccines being developed. It's a race for each country, and I agree with Secretary Mon Lopez. We have to position ourselves, but let's not plan that. Okay, there's a cure on this period, and let's move forward. No, we should plan on how we coexist with this virus, assuming the cure will come much later.
Secretary, you're also the founder of Go Negosyo and you're known for mentoring MSMEs. At this point in the pandemic, what are your most basic pieces of advice to struggling businesses?
First, we have our mentoring sessions 3 times a week on Go Negosyo Facebook, 3 times a day, 5 times a week, and that's happening. And my advice to many of our MSMEs is, and I've always shared this with them, is you have to have a plan. You have to remain cash flow positive, and if you turn cash flow negative at a certain point in time, don't wait before it depletes your entire working capital or even your family savings. Close the business for the time being, because it's not going to be worth wasting all your family savings, and it'll create more problems for you. That's my advice to many of our entrepreneurs. And look at where you can pivot. No? uh, People are moving into agriculture, agribusiness. That's an opportunity. If you are digital savvy, look at the digital platforms. Or if you have enough, wait it out. No? You have to wait it out. Don't just be brave and say, look, kaya ko to. No, this is not the time. This is not even a issue of skill of an entrepreneur. It is not the fault that we have this big pandemic health issue. So
Mm.
there are times when you have to pause, and if you can't make it through, then pause.
Secretary, can I just prompt you on that? I mean, you mentioned agriculture, you mentioned the digital space, e-commerce, certainly. Any other things that any other areas that might be areas for to consider for pivoting?
Well, you can see in this pandemic, there's so many new entrepreneurs that entered these Viber communities. Housewives selling their own special delicacies, their family favorite
Mm.
meals, and that is actually creating competition for all those offline restaurants who are doing deliveries as well. So aside from having offline people have restaurants having problems, they now have greater competition. So this whole pandemic has created also a lot of entrepreneurs. So and I think that's the way forward. I mean, on aside from digitalization of and agriculture, look at other forms of the transportation is going to open up. So. There are opportunities there. Hopefully, they will allow Angkas to come back, because there's about 30,000 riders out there. So that will give now jobs or business opportunities for these riders. Of course, with digitalization, deliveries have done very well. No, all Lalamove, Food Panda, and all these other platforms, LBC, DHL. Everybody is benefiting from the digital growth right now on Lazada, Shopee, and many other local platforms.
Hmm. But Secretary, the government
In
is
the meantime, sir, are
also
there
planning
any
to.
new facilities or mechanisms that that our MSMEs should be more aware of in terms of seeking help?
Well, Secretary Mon Lopez has requested that they be funded more, and so that they can help fund the conduit banks. No, uh, the challenge really here is when you have uh, this kind of economic problem, everybody holds back. The microfinance institutions, the MFIs, which are the ones directly lending to the micro and small entrepreneurs, of course, they need funding from the thrift banks, the rural banks, which you and even the commercial banks that fund them, no, for them to be able to lend to entrepreneurs. While interest rates have gone down by the central bank loosening up the reserve and forcing rates to go down, rates have remained more or less at the same level because they're now factoring a risk, and the risk is very high right now in
Hmm.
lending. But that's how, in a way, a situation is like this in a crisis where now a health issue has created a huge economic crisis. The previous crisis, the Asian financial crisis and the U.S. banking crisis, pale in comparison to this kind of crisis that we have, because even overseas your exports are affected, your over OFW remittances will be affected because people are also being laid off all over the world, and here domestically there are a lot of headwinds. But in the end, what's good is the Philippines, our balance sheet is good. We have been rated double B, triple B, double A, and that helps. So when the Philippines will eventually have to borrow to be able to fund the stimulus, we can pay. We don't need to pay huge interest rates to be able to borrow. Now, what is the right stimulus package that will help our people? That has to be carefully crafted because uh, it's not a matter of just putting money in, losing businesses. I believe the government should protect vital sectors like the airline sector. We cannot have no airlines running after we get out of this pandemic. So certain sectors the government will have to protect. Our MSMEs, the way we protect them is uh, give more money into the banking system, especially our rural thrift banks and MFIs. They need the money to be able to provide more working capital to the entrepreneurs. And of course, the banks are not just going to give money, they'll have to see whether that business will have the capacity to survive this crisis. If not, they will not lend at all. They will not take that risk.
Hmm. Professor, along those lines, are there any programs that would encourage these banks and other financial institutions, especially the provinces, to lend out to entrepreneurs who are trying to survive?
Well,
Hello?
I Secretary Mon mentioned a couple of programs that DTI is doing now. So I think there are three P's is one of them. No, so uh, hopefully they get more money from the stimulus package now, because then they can provide SB Corp more funding so that SB Corp can now lend more money to the rural thrift banks and the MFIs, which are the conduits. So uh, we'll have to wait. The economic team has their own version. Congresswoman Sharon Garin, and Stella Kimbo and Joey Salceda have their own version. They have a 1.3 billion stimulus. I think the economic team is much lower than that. So I was telling the economic team in Congress, maybe we should do it in tranches because we don't know how long this virus will last. So if you put a huge stimulus and you blow it and we go on ECQ, then we would have wasted it. So I believe that we
Mhm.
should be prudent. We should have a stimulus package, especially, and maybe it should be in tranches.
Hmm. Sir, before we let you go, can I have one more question? At the same time, government
Okay.
wants to put
I think,
to tax online.
Ed, are you there?
Sir, can you hear, sir?
Yes, I
Well,
don't believe.
government wants to tax online businesses. I'm wondering if this will in any way put the brakes on entrepreneurs who want to shift to online.
Well, actually, I was suggesting that we don't tax any until the end of this year. Give them a reprieve. Many housewives are trying to
Mhm.
be entrepreneurs. Let's give them a chance. Don't do that next year. Let's allow them to test the waters and see if they will be successful in what they do. And starting next year, then let's start taxing them. Mon mentioned about the Bambi, which will give them a couple of years to
Mhm.
be tax free. No, but for this year, allow the
Tax holiday
digital
muna.
platforms to thrive. No, it's growing. Let's allow
Yeah.
more people to. These are people who are coping, so let's allow them to experience how to be an entrepreneur. No, and the moment they gain their confidence, then they will continue. But if we are going to tax them the moment they start, then I mean, not now. Let's give these people a chance. No.
Yes, sir. But how's that proposal going? Are you getting good feedback on that? Kasi the last we heard, they still wanted to tax online businesses up to, of course, 250,000.
Yes, I mean, we'll see how it plays out moving forward. But I guess these entrepreneurs are still going to do what they have to do. Uh, the normal. I believe they eventually, so hopefully down the road, there'll be some kind of a compromise. No, I think Congress is trying to help these online entrepreneurs. No, so it's a matter of a couple of months. We're already in August.
Mhm.
So maybe this can be looking forward. Let's start this on January moving forward. But it's up to Secretary Dominguez. But that's my view. And if but nevertheless, whether they tax them or not, at least there's an area where these entrepreneurs can now experience how to be an entrepreneur. No? These market platforms on Viber communities and Facebook are providing that avenue, and that's good. Lazada, Shopee, and other platforms are allowing even offline big businesses to move now online. No? Everybody is shifting to online. People want food delivered at home. So there are a lot. Believe me, there are a lot of opportunities in this pandemic as well. No, and you just have to be able to spot those opportunities.
Okay.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Presidential Advisor Joey Concepcion. Sir, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank
Salamat
you.
po.
Thank you.
And that will be all for this edition of the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. I'm Edwin Gaupan News.
I'm Annie Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Robbie Alampay, and we are One News.